Next up, we're going to have David Wolfpaw, and he is going to be talking about WordPress and the INDIEWEB. And I've had a couple people come up and ask me what the INDIEWEB is, so I didn't have a good answer, to be completely honest. So we're all about to find out. So David, go ahead and we'll let you take it away.
That is a great intro. I hope we all find out. Now, does anyone here already have any familiarity with the INDIEWEB concept before coming in? Well, we are going to talk about it a bit, and as you mentioned, you're going to find out that some of it you might already be familiar with, you might already be doing, and some of it might take a little bit of extra work, and some of it right now is actually kind of near impossible. So the prior talk in this room, if you were in here, was about social media, and there is a problem with social media, at least something that I see as a problem. Who here uses Facebook? Who here loves Facebook? Like, you go on there and you're like, I am happy to be here right now. Yeah, so why are we all using it? And I'm just going to make I'm just going to make a whole rant about Facebook. I could fill multiple hours of that, but I won't do that to you. And I'm going to make sure this works. Nope, didn't figure. Okay, a little bit slower. Real quick before I get started with my presentation, I do want to thank SiteGround, the hosting company, for helping me to be here. They have an awesome program that helps send people to WordCamps, to give talks about things, and they don't even expect me to say this, but I still want to say thank you for letting me do this. And that's going to be way too long of a delay, so I'm just going to do my laptop. The web was not created to be what it is today. You know, right now we took the idea of this perfect, beautiful system and just like kind of trashed it into something else. My whole talk is just going to be gloom and doom with a little bit of hope. So when the web was started out, if you are not already familiar with this, the internet, if you're not familiar with the background story, it was started as ARPANET, which was a program designed by the US military to ensure that communications could continue even if there was some either purposeful or non-purposeful destruction of phone lines. Basically, what are we going to do to make sure we can give commands to launch the nukes if all of our other ways to communicate have been destroyed by someone else's nukes? Like I said, doom and gloom. But we've changed from that decentralized network into all of these silos. So social media has become pretty much the only way that most people use the internet. In various places around the world and in various, I don't want to make fun of people here, but I would say for various people's parents, maybe, Facebook is what they consider as the entirety of the internet. I know for my parents that's the case. That is the internet. Majority of Americans use multiple social network platforms, and their usage of those platforms has only been going up over time. We're not adding time to screens, we're taking time away from other things, like the open web. If you look at the top mobile apps downloaded around the world last year, you might notice that all four of them are owned by one company, Facebook. And pretty much every single top app on every platform is, if you knock out the games, are all social media apps. So what's the problem with this? Those are all siloed containers. Basically, what you do in Facebook stays in Facebook. What you do on Instagram is Instagram only. Some of them might allow you to share content between them. Like in the past, you used to be able to take your Instagram photos and share them to Twitter. They shut that down like 5 years ago because it no longer made sense for them to allow you to share with other networks. These networks were built on top of people using their data from other places to join in. The way that Facebook did a lot of their early growth was making it really easy for you, and yes, this is just my not so subtle hint here that there is a setting on your phone where you can tell it to not do the thing that it does by default, which is upload all your contacts to Facebook. So these platforms were built by saying, hey, you already have a whole contact book full of friends. Let's see if all of your friends, your coworkers, your colleagues are already on Facebook, and you can connect with them here. Or if they're already on Twitter or Google, whatever platform. They allowed you to take your contacts from elsewhere and bring them into that network, either invite them, or if they were already there, help you connect with them. The problem is that they don't reciprocate. They don't allow you to do that with other platforms. You know, I can't take my Facebook contacts and find all of their personal websites without doing a lot of digging. I can't take my Facebook contacts and find other ways to contact them outside of Facebook without going to each individual person and finding that out. So as I mentioned, it's going to be a little weird. As I mentioned, the web was started to be decentralized, and the web was also started to be distributed. So those are two similar terms that get used interchangeably a lot. So I just want to do a really quick breakdown. Centralization, decentralization usually means control when someone's discussing it, and distribution usually means like a location. So you can have a platform that is centralized and non-distributed, such as, say you're getting software from like Microsoft Word. It's centralized software. It all comes from Microsoft, and it is non-distributed. You run it on, well, I guess everything is a bad example now when we're moving to web apps for everything now, but prior, let's say the Word that you installed on your computer, before it was a cloud app, was non-distributed. It was on your computer and your computer only. I guess that leads into my next point of distributed centralized platforms, such as Office Online, Facebook, Twitter, most social networks, where those things exist on any device that you're going to, but they're all still controlled by one centralized authority. And then you have decentralized, BitTorrent, any cryptocurrency, or most cryptocurrencies, basically things that can be trustless, peer-to-peer, where one person doesn't have full control over the system. And then there are distributed platforms that cloud computing is the way that you might generally see this now. You're going to have something where a little bit of things exist in a variety of places. So I have some beautiful pictures of what a centralized, decentralized, and distributed network might look like. And the most important thing you can see is that there's different nodes, in this case, you might think of this as, you know, your individual computers or individual servers if it's a platform, and they are either all connected where one person has the final say in everything, or all the way set out to distributed where everybody has an equal say, or at the very least, one person cannot affect the entire network. So the valuable thing here is that you get to have a bit more control over some portion of your network. And I know I'm being very vague right now, like I'm not, you know, like I said, I could just spend the whole time ranting about specific social networks, but that's because there are a variety of ways that these can be built. And as I mentioned, I'm going to show you that a lot of these things you might already be doing without really thinking about it. WordPress itself is a decentralized and distributed system. You know, you can take the software yourself, rewrite it to do whatever you want. You can add your own themes, your own plugins, and no one can tell you you can't do that with WordPress. And then it's distributed in a way that you can host it on your own server at your house. You can go to a cloud hosting provider. You can just, you know, rent a shared server space with any hosting company you want and run a WordPress site. So the INDIEWEB is trying to take advantage of this distributed, decentralized system. I will admit the majority of stuff, if you go look up, you know, INDIEWEB things, if you go to INDIEWEB.com and start looking through the articles there, it's a big wiki with a lot of resources. It is fairly technical. It is very developer-driven. A lot of the things that are getting built are people say that they're building things to scratch their own itches. They actually have a section called itches where people just, you know, put, oh, I want something that can be a replacement for this other tool, but open source. And so, you know, I need to take some time to build this thing. So I will say that is it's not the most user-friendly, I will fully admit. But the INDIEWEB itself is really just a set of ideas, a set of philosophies around you control the things that you create, and you get to choose who gets access to it, how they get access to it, and what happens with things after you create them. So I run a Mastodon instance called tech.lgbt is where you can go find it. If you're not familiar with Mastodon, it is like an alternative to Twitter. This is a, again, decentralized and distributed system where I did not write that software, but I wanted a place that was similar in format to Twitter, where people could have conversations. The nice thing about a distributed system like this, another term that, well, a related term that they'll use for something like Mastodon is called federated, is that you don't actually need to use my website to have conversations with me on there. There are a wide variety of Mastodon instances, which is what they call the different servers, where you can sign up for an account. If you decide you don't want to use any of them, you can set up your own on your own computer, make it private or make it public, and then you can have conversations with other people using the software. So as opposed to having to go to Twitter and have an account there and have them decide, we don't like your content for whatever reason. I don't know how much I need to gauge my audience to say, we don't like your content, so we're going to block you, but we're super cool with white supremacists being here, and we're going to like do everything to make sure they get to stay on our platform for a long time. I don't have to be part of that conversation if I choose not to. I have an alternative that is very active. Quite honestly, I have a lot more fun on Mastodon than I do on Twitter. Twitter's going to drag. There's another service that I really love called PixelFed. It is a federated Instagram alternative. Basically, it's a way for people to share art, photography that works similarly to Instagram, but again, they get to have more control over everything they own. And to bring it all back to being in a WordCamp now, WordPress itself is an example of something in the IndieWeb. It is decentralized. Like I said, anyone can write their own software to go along with it, and it is distributed. You don't have to, use a copy of WordPress from one specific place or one specific person. You can still have centralized distributed WordPress, like WordPress.com, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. So WordPress works on the 4 open source freedoms. The ability to run the program for any purpose, to make changes to that program, to take the changes that you made and give them to other people, to give the program to other people and to give your changes you made to other people. Basically, I can write a plugin and I can go, here, have a copy of my plugin, whether I ask you to pay me for it or not. That's very important in the IndieWeb philosophy. The idea is that you can take the things that you've created, add on to whatever other things someone's made. So again, in the WordPress example, write your own theme, your own plugin, your own extension to someone else's theme, and share it with other people. And you get to have some control over it, but you don't have to. You don't get to have the final say over what someone else can do. So I can say, here's a copy of my extension. It also falls under the GPL. So you also have to. You also have to use that for any derivatives. Sorry. But I don't get to say, you don't get to use it on your site because I don't like the content of your site. Or something else other than content I might like. Not like, sorry. So IndieWeb has something called INDIEMARK. It's actually a WordPress core developer put together these little checkboxes that you can do. There's a website called indiemark.org. You can go through, it's basically like a checklist where you can say, does my site do these things? And you can get a score on how your site is working. There's also a website, and I have some resources, and I guess I'll do a little, if you want to get a copy of all the links and everything, they're at that URL at the bottom, WordCamp Greenville 2019. There's also a website called INDIEWEBify.me that does the same thing, but it actually just goes to your website, examines your website to see if these things are there, and returns a score to you. So there are different levels of IndieWeb. You don't have to do all of the levels. My personal site does not. And they don't necessarily have to be in order, but they're usually ranked by complexity. So the first level is owning your own data and identity. That means you have a personal website, your own domain. You can sign into that website, and you have some original searchable content on it. That pretty much describes every WordPress site, right? So you can all just go check off number 1 right there if you already have your own WordPress site. All right, who here used MySpace? Yeah, do you miss this? You don't? Come on. Okay, so I use LiveJournal a lot, but when I figured out that I could make like little trailing thing that would trail behind the arrow, and so I could, like, everyone who visited my live journal would have to have these really annoying sounds play and stuff. I loved it. So I tried to find like the worst amazing MySpace example that I could find versus, Facebook, to say that you can have control over how your site looks. For better or worse, you get to control what your site looks like in the end. You also get to control how your site functions. I can have that auto-playing music that can harass everybody when they come to my site. Thankfully, now browsers also have a way for me to mute that automatically. Seems falling.
I thought Facebook was
Sorry.
super boring compared to MySpace.
I do think it's boring. I mean, I admit, so I'm saying this as a joke. For better or worse, yes, it is a cleaner aesthetic. It's usually easier to find things. I think you lose a lot of nuance there. You lose a lot of value. And you lose the ability to have more control over how it's used. So when I have my own website, I get to send people to the things I want to, as opposed to sending them to a link that Facebook sends me to. Like the Facebook instant articles, for instance, where if you try to click on something from a website and they have that set up, or Google AMP, it will instead load their copy of it, where you don't have quite as much control. And I think I mentioned to Chase earlier, the one thing that hasn't gone away in all this time of social growth is newsletters. Email newsletters are still the thing that people most heavily engage with. I can't easily send people to my newsletter from my Facebook page, but I can do so from my own website. And my website looks slightly better than this, so a little bit easier to read. Also, I don't have to worry about somebody else making changes, and then every time they roll out a new change to like the feed, you get angry about it, and then everyone forgets a month later, and then they do it again a few months later and get angry again. So like I said, INDIEMARK Level 1, if you have your own WordPress site, you pretty much already have that covered. By the way, these things are not WordPress specific. It just happens that since it's the largest web building platform, there are a lot of tools already made for it. I'm going to show you a few at the end. So Level 2, you have the ability to post notes and Posse. Posse is an acronym for publish on your own site and syndicate elsewhere. There's a few alternatives. There's acronyms for everything in the INDIEWEB. You also have the ability, on your site, if you're going to hit Level 2, you're going to have an H card. I'll show you what that is in a moment. You are going to have that ability to syndicate to silos, so that I can take my content and publish it to other websites from my site. And you need to have some ability to navigate across the posts on your site. Again, that bottom one, unless you've designed your site very, very poorly, you're pretty much going to have that by default in WordPress, some way to navigate between newer and older posts, unless you purposefully take all the navigation away. So that H card, that is a form of microformat. Microformats are, for everything for microformats is Creative Commons, and it's also part of the open web standards, so you can use any of these things to your heart's content, remix them. The idea is that there are standards of classes that you can use. So in this case, I have an H card, and then I have a few other things here that identify the type of content here. So it's a little bit further than just using semantic HTML. You're actually signifying, this is, by the way, this is the code that's just on the sidebar on my site, where I link that this is the URL to my site, and I'm signifying that this is a URL for a user. It is my name. This is my user card, basically like info about me. URL for an organization that I'm part of, my company, and then URLs that are other places I can be found online. Those are the me relationship links at the end. And I put these as links because I want them there so that the info can be read, but I don't really need a link to my Twitter or GitHub account in that little bio. So something like this is literally just taking the same info that you might already have on your site and just structuring it in a way that it's easier for other places to read through it and to verify that information. So those me relational links are really important because they're a way for you to signify ownership. GitHub and Twitter happen to be ones that also use those relationship tags. If you have a URL, in your Twitter bio, it will signify that you have a relationship to that website. By having a two-way relationship here, I can use something called INDIEAUTH, which is really something I'm not going to go over here because it's a little bit more, I'll say it's a little bit more complicated, but also something that can be done in a variety of ways, where you can signify, this proves that I am this person because I was able to create links both ways here. In fact, you can use your website to log in to some other websites with INDIEAUTH. If you're familiar, if you go to a website and they're like, here, create an account, or log in via Google or Facebook. Those use something called OAuth. It is very useful. A lot of people use them, but that also means that you have one place that can be a point of failure, one place that can be, in Facebook's case, pretty much every single story that you hear about something that involves Facebook is going to be, oh yeah, they said they were using this for just this thing, but they were also using it for these 10 other things without telling you or lying about. Where they were using people's OAuth logins to draw more connections between the sites that they go to and build up their profiles even more. And then I think, late last year they had like a breach of some of those tokens, and so people's logins for other sites were compromised. Anyway, I can do the same thing here, but I get to be the one that has security breaches, not some other company. I think that's the real takeaway here. So I mentioned Posse. First of all, the creator of, or the original developer of Drupal put this on his website. All credit goes to him for this graphic. The idea is that you can take your content that you create and publish it to other websites, as opposed to publishing to other websites and then putting it onto your website. So all the content that I create on my website, I can choose to share to other websites via my website. Now you might think you can already do that now, just copy a link and like a little card will get created when you post to Facebook, but these things can be automated, and they can also make sure that you have the proper canonical links back to your website to signify that you are the original owner, as opposed to me publishing something on, like a picture on Instagram and then pulling that into my website. So an example is I can publish a post on my own website, and then I can publish it on Medium, and Medium actually, by default, uses the URL that you signify as the originator of the article as the canonical URL. So they're actually doing a good job there in terms of signifying when you post to both your website and Medium that your website is where people should go for the content. So it's not going to hurt you for SEO purposes. But again, more important, I get to have control over that content. I get to change it later if I want to, and I get to signify, if Medium goes away, which like half of social media sites out there, it's going to go away. Like how many people used Vine before that went away? I'm not even going to list everything. There's so many ones that went away that I'm already, I'm no longer on Tumblr because they got rid of like half their users. I'm no longer on LiveJournal because my LiveJournal account now is just living on Russian servers. If you don't know, did anyone use LiveJournal? I admit, I would say, I don't want to age myself here, but you're all maybe a little different age group than me, and I was really into LiveJournal in high school before I had my own website, and I found out later that that LiveJournal was bought out by a Russian company, and now it's kind of this whole other thing. Lots of really interesting stories about that. All that time making that beautiful MySpace profile, and how long you spent debating who was going to be in your top 8 and all that. That's all gone now. It still exists as a website. It's not nearly as popular as it was before. It was, last sold for like $30,000, up from the $500 million that News Corp spent on it. Don't really think anyone's going to be going back to MySpace soon. Or not. Maybe they'll have a renaissance. So level 3 of INDIEMARK. Now you're going to be getting a little more complicated here. These are the things that I can say here. These probably aren't default on your website. You have the ability to post replies from your website and send web mentions. So web mention is a W3C standard for signifying somewhere else that there is content. Sorry, I'm trying to word this right. Sending a notification somewhere that there is content available. Basically, I am telling Twitter, hey Twitter, I posted a reply to somebody's tweet via my website, send them a reply via Twitter. I'll show you an example of what that looks like, and it'll be way more clear than my words. You have the ability to publish replies to people from your site, and you can syndicate the replies that you get. So an example, I sent a tweet to Chris Aldrich, which is a guy who's written some of the plugins that I'm going to show you later for WordPress. And he, instead of replying to me via Twitter, he replied to me on his own website, typed up his response, and it came to me in the form of a tweet that happened to have a little bit of a more link. I had actually clicked to read it because when you're writing on your own site, you are not constrained by 280 characters. So he was able to continue this conversation with us without having to actually interact with Twitter at all, and we didn't have to go to his website to have a conversation with him. And I think that's pretty cool that I can choose not to be part of a platform, but still participate with people on that. But some of the things that would get you into, like I said, some of the higher levels of INDIEMARK are things that are only theoretical because some of these platforms make it really hard to do this. Twitter is a good example of one that just changes their APIs on a regular basis because somebody decided that it might make them more money, and they still don't. Level 4 of INDIEMARK, you can now receive comments and display them on your website. So an example is on my website. If somebody responds with a link to one of my articles, so let's say I type like, hey, I wrote a new blog post about blah, 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 and I put a link to it. If somebody responds to that, it can come up on your site as a comment, which is great. You can do the same thing with Facebook too, so that you can have one piece of canonical content and have your conversation all exist in one place. It's cool if someone shares my post on Facebook or on Twitter and some people chat about it, and then I might never see that, or somebody will have asked one question one place and I'll respond one place, but somebody somewhere else won't ever see that comment. Now I can have all of those things grouped together. Level 4 also has automated web mentions. There's actually a plugin that works really well to do this, that just whenever you do something on your site, it'll send it to wherever it's supposed to go. And you can have multiple response types. So the example I'm going to use in this case is Twitter, because 1, that's the one I'm on, and 2, it's the easiest one for me to visualize. I wrote an article. Somebody commented directly on my site in this case. Some people liked it on Twitter. Some people hit retweet on Twitter. And my business account mentioned the link in a post. And you can have multiple different types here. You can RSVP to events, via comments here. So I could actually have like the events calendar plugin set up, and somebody can respond via a tweet that they're going to be attending that event and have it show up on the site. As I mentioned, I've had comments that have gone here from Twitter. So someone will comment on Twitter like, oh, question about this, and then I can respond either via my website or via Twitter, have it show up there as well. It'll give you more content for your website, and it'll have one place where all of those things can get stored. I don't want to worry about losing this information later because Twitter goes out of business, or my account gets deleted, or I just decide to stop using it, or honestly, their search is kind of a mess sometimes. Can't find something when I want to look for it. I know where it is on my own site. And level 5 is the one that I'm going to say is a bit more, honestly, it's a bit more hypothetical at this point. The main reason is that it mainly focuses around the ability to create, read, update, or delete those comments later. So all the things before, the ability to modify them. If I decide to, let's say I respond to somebody on Twitter, and then they respond it back, shows up as a comment. If they later decided to delete their tweet, my site should go back and delete their comment if I'm allowing it to do that, or vice versa. If I delete a comment from my site that I wrote, then it should go to my Twitter account and delete that tweet. That doesn't really work very well because most of these platforms, as I mentioned, they're siloed. They change up their APIs all the time, so it's like it's really hard to do it where you can interact with these sites consistently. And some of them don't even offer these features. Who here wants an edit button on Twitter and has asked for it for like a decade, and instead they go, cool, we hear you, and we are going to buy up this company and then shut it down because you all liked it, or whatever other not adding an edit button feature that they've decided to add. So like I said, most platforms do not allow this. Some do in limited cases. So at the moment, if you can get to those first 4 levels, you are golden. Getting started with INDIEWEB is really easy. Get your own domain and hosting, set up a WordPress site. If you want to feel fancy, set up something like IndieAuth, web mentions. Like I said, there are plugins that exist to do these things for you. Add some extra markup. In fact, if you have a well-made theme, it's probably already using micro formats for all the content. So if you ever look at the code of your theme and you see that it's in an article tag, but that article tag for your post also has a class of h-entry, that's a micro format right there. And then link back wherever it's possible to link to other things. Oh, right, I did not, I trimmed it out of the screenshot. Actually, below where there's the comment field, there's also a way for people to write responses of their own and then signify to you that they've written a response just by posting a link. So, Chase can write an awesome article on his website, and I can write my rebuttal to it, because never mind, it wasn't that great. And instead of writing that all as a comment on your site, I want it to be on my site. And then I just put a link, and it will signify a connection there, and it will post a response to both of our sites. Because I didn't cut it into that screenshot there. Honestly, no one's used that, so if anyone wants to go trash something I've written, please do, just so I can play with that feature. Right, I said the majority of these things are either 1, you've probably done them already, or 2, would not require that much work. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, try backfilling from some of your other content. For instance, you can go to Twitter and download your old tweets and put them onto your site. I have a private repository site where I have a lot of other content, and the most useful thing for me is it's one place where I have my own search over. So all of my old tweets, old articles I've saved to Pocket, my old Instagram photos from back when I used that, GitHub commits. I used to put Google Fit things from when I had smartwatches, which I haven't honestly used that yet, but they're on the site from back when I used that. Now I have my own repository where I'm like, oh, I remember something about this, and I can type in a word and have my own private search. That's honestly what I found that most useful for. But you can take all of your old content from elsewhere, backfill it onto your site so you have some more content, but also so you can use it in ways that you control it. You don't have to worry about that account disappearing forever and losing all that content. If you are anything like me, you've probably written multiple novels on Twitter, and yet not nearly as much on your own site. Try posting to your own site first, and then publish it elsewhere. If you're going to write, something that you think would be a good, Facebook post you want to share with people, why not write it on your site and share it share it to Facebook as opposed to writing it there. Add the ability to let people reply via web mention. So if somebody decides to comment on that Facebook post, it will show up on your site, and you'll get a notification, and you can respond back. And then the final one, setting up micropub. Micropub is another W3C spec where you can, it's both a spec, and they also call the clients micropub clients, basically a way for you to do things on your website, usually write content, without actually interacting with your website directly. So you can set a lot of writing tools like Bear, Simple Note. No, Simple Note doesn't. Simple Note just has published to the web, right? Yeah. I'm looking at it on that team. Sorry, I'm trying to think. A lot of writing tools. I use Boost Note, and they have the ability for you to, if you write something in that text editor, you can publish it directly to your website. That's what that kind of tool is. So basically, you can set it up so that you can write elsewhere and then have it published to your site. There is one plugin that's going to be the ruler of all of your other plugins here if you don't want to have to write any of these tools yourself. That is the INDIEWEB program, or INDIEWEB plugin. The INDIEWEB organization put this together. It's kind of like a wrapper for a lot of other plugins, honestly. It makes it a little bit easier to set up tools like those authentication points, micropub clients, web mentions, syndication. If you use this plugin, it will walk you through a lot of steps on some of the things you can do to get all those other features, and it lets you toggle them on and off So honestly, it's a plugin to install other plugins, but it is actually really helpful. And there's another plugin that I use heavily called Keyring, and there's a plugin extension for this called Keyring Social Importer. This allows you to authenticate with a lot of different services. I think there's about 24 services built in, but it's also really nice. The tool is extendable. You can write your own integrations. So basically, you can use a tool like this and connect it to your Fitbit account or to your Twitter account, which are two that I had it connected to, but there wasn't an integration for Pocket. Because there's an integration for Instapaper, I use Pocket, whatever, doesn't matter. Thankfully, the guy who wrote this, Works Automatic, he decided to make it extendable, so I was able to write my own integration to go to Pocket, in more than a few minutes, because I'm not as technically literate, but shorter than it would have been if I tried to figure it out myself. And so using a tool like this, I can then backfill with other content, or honestly, I still use Twitter. So if I'm going to write something on Twitter, within a few minutes, it gets published to that private site so that I have a copy of it for later, all the replies and retweets and things like that as well. That makes it really, really easy. All right, that was a lot of random things to go over, and no one had probably heard that phrase before coming in here today, so I probably expect a few questions. Do I need to repeat or anything for the thing? Okay, sorry. So some platforms limit how much you can get from them, but something like Keyring can make it more helpful. That is true. I know with Keyring, I think the API limit, in the past, the limit they ran up against with Twitter specifically was the last 3,000, I think, and they were only able to do I think it was 300 at a time, and 3,000 was the max number of tweets that it could get before the Twitter API, would shut you off from being able to grab more. In that case, both for the essence of time and for that limitation, I just went to Twitter's. In your settings, there is a My Data page. You can request a download of all of your info. It gives you, however long it takes later, it sends you a zip, or the link to download a zip that has a JSON format, I think an XML and an HTML format of all your info, and then whatever other tools you might want to use to get it up. Yeah, I was thinking Twitter specifically, honestly, Facebook's the hardest one. Facebook is the one that most jealously guards all of your information, despite the fact that the entire network is built on you connecting from other platforms in the first place. They actually used to have, same with Twitter, they used to have a lot more open integrations, and then slowly started shutting them down when the usefulness of those integrations served its purpose, aka getting more users and making themselves look attractive to investors. Yeah.
More generally, so if you create an INDIEWEB for yourself, are you the only one who actually accesses that site, or is it something that is also open to the public?
Yeah, so the one I was talking about, the one where I'm backfill all my info, that one I happen to use as a private site, as in I have a site hosted online. If you go there not logged in, you're just going to see a splash page. I used to have a site up that pulled lots of info. If you want to see some good examples, the guy who made that Keyring one, Bo Levins, his personal website, I don't know the URL. I think it's Dented Reality is his blog. Aaron Parecki and Chris Aldrich, who are people who wrote those other plugins, their personal sites. You can see more info when they write something somewhere else, it'll be originally or posted to Twitter or something. So it doesn't have to be public, but it also doesn't have to be private as well. All of the stuff that I do on my personal blog is public. I want people to read those articles, but I also want to interact with them elsewhere and still have all that content live on my site. The most useful thing for me there is that I can share articles to Twitter, to Medium, to other places, and still have original ownership of it. And I also don't need to be on other platforms to continue conversations about them. I personally don't have a Facebook account or an Instagram or a whatever. There's so many social media things out there that there are so many popular ones that I'm just not part of those things, but I can still have conversations with them. Yeah, your hand. Sorry. Yeah. No, you.
In looking at Facebook, I've heard people talk about, like, I think, a Hootsuite.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that differ from INDIEWEB?
So this is, and so I just want to be clear that this idea is like it's an ideology, it's a philosophy, it's like a state of mind, kind of. What I mean to say is that that by hosting your own WordPress sites here, honestly, you're already kind of part of that. Even if it is a group of people who will self-identify that way and say, like, here we are pushing for this specific mission. And you might not be. You might say, no, I just want to have my own blog, or I just use my website to run my business. And that's fine, but like you are also kind of part of it. So the way that differs is that that tool is just made to take something that you did, or take some content that you're writing and send it to those places, usually like pre-scheduling. So like I can write a dozen tweets out and then schedule when they're going to go out, and they'll, instead of me having to actually be there on Twitter at that time to send them out. So that really only exists in Hootsuite and then on Twitter or Meetup or Facebook or whatever other network. One thing I didn't mention that a lot of other things that you can do with things like Zapier and IFT or other programs that can just integrate together. Honestly, a lot of these things you can do without a lot of effort because there's so many programs like that, or like Hootsuite that exist that will just let you connect two sites together. So it's getting a lot easier to do this, but really the hardest thing is push back from places that purposefully make it hard. Yeah.
If you can post to other websites via your website, could that possibly increase spam?
Increase spam? I don't see why not, but yeah, I mean, I suppose that could be the case. Have some good spam tools. I mean, I personally use Akismet. It does work really well for me, for my sites. I don't think I have more spam than average. I might, but honestly, all the spam I get is still the same old stuff that can be flagged by a computer pretty quickly. Honestly, it's not one that I really thought about for that. No, my main goal is to not rely on third-party providers for everything. I mean, I'm still relying on them for my hosting, like for a company. I'm still relying on somebody to manage my domain name, manage the availability of my website, things like that. And it requires more work on your part. But like I said, a lot of these things you're already doing. It's more of getting in the mindset of having ownership of the things that you do online and being more, not having to give things up. I don't have to give up having conversations with people on other websites just because I decide I want to post things on my own site. Yeah.
In terms of like multimedia, if you post something on your site and it's pushed to one of these social networks, I know a lot of the social networks have clauses in their terms of service that say once you post something on our site, it becomes our property.
Mm-hmm.
Does that change anything there, or?
Also one I hadn't really considered, quite honestly. I do know that there have been some cases around content posted. I know Twitter had specifically for some things that people posted that were used for, or no, sorry, you're talking about like Twitter being able to do whatever it wants, or that platform being able to use it. Because
I'm a photographer.
Right.
I wanted to push out one of my pictures.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't like Facebook because they say if you post something on Facebook,
We can use it in things.
property and
Well, so you still have the copyright of it, even if you post to Facebook. But they're saying that you've granted them a non-exclusive license to, do things, which I know for all intents and purposes is like the same thing. I admit I don't have a good answer there. You still have the same protection of like if you post a photograph and it goes to Facebook. I can't go to Facebook and take it and use it for whatever I want. But I suppose yes, Facebook themselves can, which is another challenge of centralized systems. They get to set the rules, and you just have to decide if you want to play by those rules or not. Yeah.
I was going to say two things. One, are you finding this drives a lot more traffic to your site? And two, do you find people interact with you a lot more than your experience with other platforms?
Yes and kinda. Yes, it actually has driven more traffic to my site. I wouldn't say a lot more interaction, but certainly a bit more interaction. I found a lot more interaction for me happens on Mastodon than on Twitter, as an example, and a lot more interaction with what I write happens on Mastodon than happens on Twitter. That might be the difference of the platform and of the users that make up that platform. But I will say after doing this, I do have more people reading, or at least the analytics on my site tell me more people are reading, and I'm having more interaction on the site.
And Mastodon kind of sounds like Usenet cross with Twitter. I mean, is that essentially kind of how it is? Where you got, here's your topic, and it's on Mastodon, but because it's not centralized, people have to look for it to find it.
Yeah, so Mastodon is more, you would think of that as like a one-to-one with Twitter. So the difference is, like, people make them, I would say it's, the makeup in general has been either small individual communities, some of the largest, like I know that, was it Philadelphia has, was it Philadelphia or Pittsburgh? Maybe it's Pittsburgh. One of them has a very active Mastodon instance that's specific to that city. And it's one of the larger ones, and it's just because that city embraced it very well. A lot of the very large ones are around a specific topic. And honestly, a lot of them are, I'm trying to think of a good term to say, like alternative. Like one of the, I think one of the biggest Mastodons is called like Witches Town, and it is for people who are witches. I'm like not making that up. Mine, I wanted to go the route of, this was originally part of like a meetup group we had in Orlando of people who identify or are allies, LGBT world, who are also involved in tech some way. And I want to make it much more general than, like a group that we had those specific to WordPress, for instance. I actually tried starting one for Orlando specifically, but even spreading among the tech people I knew in Orlando didn't really take off, so I just kind of killed that one. So the idea is that that group that's in Pittsburgh, I can interact with them via my group or via any of the thousands of other ones seamlessly. As in you can, like my handle is on tech.lgbt, my website there is @David, but my handle, if you were to look at me from Mastodon Social, which is the biggest one just because it's like the original one, would be @David@tech.lgbt. So like you have like a extended address there. So you can interact with people from a variety of other places, again, without having to have accounts at 1,000 different websites. You can even set your own up just to interact with other people, where you control everything. Any other questions? Anyone going to go, set up their site so they can? I think my favorite thing is just being able to respond to stuff on Twitter and other sites without having to actually go to them.
All right, very good. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Certainly.
Round of applause.
Thank you.